So, will cryptanalytically relevant quantum computers make CBDCs useless or make them a necessity? Right? And I kind of wanted to start looking into a little bit more of a niche topic, I guess, in between the kind of CBDC space, if you'd even call it that. But regardless, what exactly do we mean by this? So by cryptanalytically relevant quantum computers, we basically mean, quantum computers that can crack cryptographic codes, so to say. In this specific case, we're looking at PKC systems, Public Key Cryptography systems, and specifically for a potential US-based CBDC, right? And most of this comes from a recent paper published by the Office of Science and Technology from the White House, and that paper itself in PDF form will be in the description. As always, I always kind of put the sources in there so you guys can read them for yourselves, right? The whole point is to think for yourself and that sort of thing. So, to say the least. So that being said, why did I ask if I'd say they'd either be useless or make it a necessity, right? Basically making CBDCs useless or a necessity. What do I mean by this? So when I say useless, basically, because it's a central bank digital currency, so it's kind of centralized, and I assume there would be a significant degree of bureaucracy in it, just from the very nature of it itself. And so, with that being said, it's probably not going to be that, we'll say, agile or flexible to deal with, to use a broad term, kind of attackers to the system in general, right? And not really making an argument for or against CBDCs. That's not the point of the video, just kind of looking specifically at CBDCs and quantum computing with this respect. That's kind of the point of all of the videos as a whole, is to kind of get a better understanding of central bank digital currencies, and so hopefully we could, position yourselves and myself in a better position overall, or at least understand them in general. So, excuse me. What is the point of? Let's go this way. So, quantum resistant cryptography, right, is basically where this is going, and having a PKC system that is resistant to these quantum computers, right? And so this would basically prevent the CBDC system from being rendered useless to begin with, right? And however, on the other hand, where we get them to become a necessity is basically, what if this is like the only system that can protect itself against these types of quantum computers, really looking at kind of like the hacking side of things, so to say, right? Which brings up an interesting point, and I know it's kind of an aside, but the whole free market private sector, if the banking system is still allowed to do what they want to do, right? So if they're still allowed to function in the traditional financial sense, they'd most likely, have this as well. If it's out there in general, they'll be able to create their own form if they don't do it first, right? Regardless. So an interesting thing that's brought up in the paper is the National Security Memorandum 10, is just the name of this memorandum, I guess. But anyway, the whole point of this is to prioritize the transition to quantum resistant cryptography, right? However, the agencies that would have to do this transition shouldn't do it before there's basically a finished set or a complete set of NIST standards, so NIST standards, right? And that's complete. And according to the paper, this is expected at sometime in 2024, right? So it gives kind of a, time horizon, whether that be when a CBDC is implemented. Obviously that wasn't explicit in the paper, since the whole paper itself is kind of like, this is kind of just testing the waters, so to say, on different design choices. But at least these NIST standards are expected to be completed in 2024. And they can be applied to other things in general, not specifically just CBDCs, just they could apply, right, is all I'm saying. But that being said, so a CBDC system could be launched with a traditional system that's not quantum resistant, meaning a traditional non-quantum resistant PKC system, right? However, once this transition would occur, without knowing the technicalities of the system in general, it's kind of up for question of whether or not the older transactions on, I guess we'll say previous ledger, or just earlier on the ledger before this transition, if those become vulnerable to this kind of to these cryptanalytically relevant quantum computers, right? So basically, would that hurt the privacy of the people, or I guess the early adopters of the system in general, which is obviously something you don't want to do if user adoption of a new system is kind of a major question to begin with. And so basically to destroy the privacy of the initial adopters is probably not good for the future of whatever system happens to come up, or even if it does. And another question is, like, how old would these transactions have to be? Maybe even before, and this is one question that pops up more on the transaction and ledger kind of design choices, is, like, how long are they going to keep these transactions recorded, right? Or are they basically is it going to be archived in a specific way? How exactly do they do that? And I know I'm pretty much just asking more questions, and that's not particularly helpful, but it's important to keep in mind, like, the system isn't like set in stone, right? That's the whole point of the playlist in general, is looking at the different CBDC design choices from different angles and trying to understand the possible ways this could go, at least to some extent, right? And so without knowing the technicalities of the system, it's harder to postulate where this could go, right? And so one question that I guess, and if we basically have no choice, right, to go to a whole CBDC and all that, which is probably what it would be anyway if one were to arise, maybe not, or at least there would be major incentives in place for user adoption, and we'll leave it there, keeping the politics and that sort of stuff out of it for now, right? So would it be better, in your guys' opinion, just to kind of pose a question and love to hear your guys' feedback on it. So would it be better for the system as a whole, or maybe even specifically for the end users, right? Depending on which angle you want to take, both or any angle really is welcome. Would it be better for it to adopt a traditional system now and take advantage of being implemented earlier, or just wait in general until you have this quantum resistant PKC system that could be developed and applied to a central bank digital currency, so that it helps, right? And so that this whole quantum computing problem isn't a problem anymore. And either way, depending on which way they go or would go, right, it'd be important to have something called cryptographic agility. Basically, in terms of the cryptography of the CBDC in general, right? So how easy can it be updated, pretty much, because all of this is changing in terms of, I guess, there's new innovation in pretty much anything you can think of, right? And so it's the same thing that applies here. Is it going to, are they going to have to, the problems that they have to protect themselves against now are going to be different than what they are in 5 to 10 years, right? And that's kind of more of a general statement, not specific just to CBDCs, but obviously it applies to it. That's the whole point of talking about the advent of quantum computing and how it could apply to a CBDC, right? So that being said, I will put cards up in the video, or cards up in the top and bottom right corners, right, of the video. For one is just a video on a plain PKC system, public key cryptography, to reiterate. The other one is basically is the same thing, but adding zero knowledge proofs to that and how that kind of applies to privacy, right? Since this whole video is pretty much about cryptography, I wanted to put those in there to kind of get more of a baseline discussion if you guys haven't seen those or are unfamiliar with some of the terms that I've used. Those are explained more in depth in those videos as well. So hope to see you guys in one of those.